All right. Christians maintain that as a result of divine grace, human persons can survive their deaths. This occurs as a result of a remarkable divine act, something we call resurrection. And it constitutes an important piece of the good news that Christians profess. Conceptually, this is a baffling claim. How can it be that I, God willing, will exist after my bodily death? One answer is to suggest, as René Descartes famously did, that I am not my body, and that I am instead an immaterial mind or soul. I'll be using those terms interchangeably, though I recognize that in other contexts it's useful to distinguish them. For our purposes, the mind or the soul is just that part, that immaterial part of you, if any there be, that is distinct from the body. This yields the following account of post-mortem survival. Upon my bodily death, my soul persists. Since I am my soul and not my body, I persist. Where or in what conditions I will persist is a matter left to divine judgment. But the fact of my persistence is owing to the fact that though my bodily processes cease and my body decays, or worse, that it is obliterated and cast into a billion pieces, my soul persists to become the occupant of a new glorified body, or in any case, to enjoy continued existence. The view is notably Platonic in origin. Here's Plato. Sorry, I never know how to represent an immaterial substance, so that's the best I can do. It's notably Platonic in origin, and it appears to be at odds with the Apostles' Creed, which explicitly affirms the resurrection of the body. Moreover, a significant number of those who think hard about the nature of human persons, about what sorts of beings we are, deny the very dualism on which it is based. The majority of philosophers, contemporary philosophers, are physicalists. And I would imagine the same is true of a good number of biologists, physicists, psychologists, and neurophysiologists, as well, I understand, as a growing number of theologians. Indeed, in a talk that he gave to the Society of Christian Philosophers, N.T. Wright claims that for Paul, as well as for a number of folks writing in the New Testament, it's very clear that the doctrine is about resurrection of the body. Okay? So that's just one example of a theologian who's thinking these terms. Physicalists believe that human beings like you and me are composed entirely and only of physical stuff. Stuff is a technical term there. You could insert substance if you like. The implication, of course, is that contrary to what Descartes and Plato thought, you and I are neither wholly nor partly constituted by an immaterial soul. Instead, you just are your body. Or, more accurately, you are some part of your body, most probably some part of your brain or central nervous system. To see this, consider Bob. Bob is a human being. Now, if physicalism is correct, then Bob is through and through a material or physical thing. Perhaps a better way to put it is that Bob is his brain. There it is. There, Bob is his brain. There's Bob. After all, it won't do to insist that Bob is identical with his body, since some parts of Bob's body could go missing. He could lose an arm in an unfortunate accident, for example. Okay, so there it goes. And Bob would nevertheless continue to exist. What's more, suppose Bob is to undergo a radical transplantation surgery in which a significant number of his critical organs, his heart, lung, liver, here, I'll show you, there they go. They're all going to be replaced. They're all switched out, let's say, for new ones. Now, I suspect that Bob will be quite concerned about the upcoming surgery, right? He's going to be a little nervous, but I doubt that he will wonder who it is that will exit the operating room at the surgery's completion. Of course it will be Bob, because none of those anyway, particular organs are essential to Bob's being Bob. On the other hand, suppose Bob is instead facing a brain transplant surgery, in which the surgeon will remove Bob's brain and replace it with someone else's. Okay, so here we go. There goes the brain. Right? Okay. Well, I don't know about you, but if I am Bob, I'm quite concerned about just who will be wheeled out of that operating room. Okay, so there's Bob. He's concerned. Will it be Bob or someone else, right? I'm thinking if I'm undergoing this, I'm looking forward to this operation, I'm wondering, will it be me or will it be someone else who leaves that room? All of this is simply to suggest that if we are essentially physical things, then we are likely our brains, or even more plausibly, part of our brains. We know, after all, that persons can survive the loss of portions of their brains. The reasons for physicalism's prominence in philosophical circles are varied. Some adopt the view because they have become convinced that the alternative, substance dualism, is flawed and perhaps even incoherent. In a famous exchange with Descartes, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia asked how it is that the human soul can determine the movement of the animal spirits in the body so as to perform voluntary acts, being as it is merely a conscious or pensante substance. Now, don't misread animal spirits there as anything too ethereal. This is a physical process. They just describe the physical process a little differently than we do these days. What she was driving at is a question about how an immaterial thing, which the mind is purported to be, can produce effects in a body, as happens every time we act. And vice versa, as in the case where tissue damage causes a pain sensation. Descartes didn't have a satisfying answer, and the problem has since become known as the mind-body problem. The upshot is that the dualist is challenged to offer an explanation for how things belonging to distinct ontological categories, the material and the immaterial, can nevertheless causally interact. The problem is that an answer to this question is not terribly easy to come by. Whether the problem is tractable is a matter of debate among philosophers, but this much seems true. Christians already maintain that immaterial to material causation is possible, since they posit that an immaterial being, namely God, both created and continually interacts with the material or physical universe. Though she may not be able to explain how this is so, the Christian theist accepts that it is possible. And if she is right, then there is no obvious incoherence in supposing that the causal interaction between minds and bodies is also possible. It is perhaps largely for this reason that Christian physicalists have not tended to list the mind-body problem among their chief motivations for denying dualism and adopting physicalism. However, even if substance dualism is not incoherent, there may nevertheless be reason to resist it as a view about the nature of human persons like you and me. That God could have made beings with distinct souls and bodies doesn't imply that he did so. Some Christian physicalists have been motivated by what they take to be theological or biblical reasons for preferring physicalism over dualism. Nancy Murphy suggests that physicalism better captures the Christian view about the nature of persons and the nature of human resurrection than does dualism, which has its roots in Platonic theory and finds a home in popular Christianity as a result of philosophical influence rather than biblical or creedal adherence. Now, it is certainly an interesting question just what the biblical view of the nature of human persons is, if indeed such a metaphysical view can be clearly gleaned from Scripture. But if that was the topic of this lecture, then I would be the wrong person to be giving it. Instead, my question is this: whatever one's motivation for physicalism may be, does physicalism, seem to have some problems with my slide, sorry. Does physicalism preclude the possibility of an afterlife? That is, can one consistently be both a physicalist and a Christian theist? Perhaps the most notable motivation for Christian and non-Christian physicalists alike is that science appears to strongly support a physicalist picture of the human person. Brain science tells us that there is a high degree of correlation between mental phenomena, things like beliefs, desires, perceptions, sensations, intentions, and so on, and brain phenomena, things like neural events, chemical processes, and the like. Indeed, in many cases, brain science can tell us which mental states or events correlate with which brain states or events. Couple this with the fact that additional discoveries are being made at an accelerated pace, and it would seem natural to suppose that we can eventually, with time, come to have an exhaustive list of the correlations. In other words, the empirical data makes reasonable the belief that for every mental state M, there is a physical correlate P. Of course, this acknowledgement alone doesn't secure physicalism over dualism, as an exhaustive list of the correlations won't by itself reveal precisely how the mind relates to the body or the brain. But additional facts regarding the apparent causal connections between the two may bolster the case. For example, we know that if we increase certain chemicals in the brain, for example, serotonin, it will affect the subject's mood. And we know that damage to certain regions of the brain will result in memory loss or impairment of speech. So the connection between the mental and the physical appears to be quite tight. So tight, in fact, that many of the phenomena we once attributed to the mind are now routinely explained by appealing solely to goings-on in the brain. It's not an enormous leap to conclude on this basis that the mental just is the physical, or in any case that it reduces to the physical, or that it utterly depends in some other way on the physical. Indeed, it appears to be a methodological assumption in some disciplines that if one cares to understand the mind, the thing to do is to examine the brain. Physicalism comes in a couple of forms. Reductive physicalists maintain that my mental life, that is, my beliefs, my desires, intentions, emotional states, etc., is wholly reducible to neural events and chemical processes in my brain. The upshot is that there's nothing distinctive or special about the mental. The mental just is the physical. One concern about reductive physicalism is that it appears to be incompatible with the thesis that human beings sometimes act freely. After all, reductive physicalism implies that everything I do is caused by neural events in me. Suppose I raise my hand because I wish to hail a taxi. According to reductive physicalism, my hand raising is not caused by my desire to hail a cab, but rather by some neural event which sends a signal ultimately to my limb. But neural events, like all physical events, are governed by physical laws. And which physical laws there are and whether they hold are not matters that are up to me. So it seems that my actions are not up to me. Additionally, there are questions about whether reductive physicalism can adequately account for the fact that you and I are conscious beings, capable of being aware, of having experiences. Non-reductive physicalists maintain, like their reductionistic counterparts, that there are only physical substances and that I am one such, so there is no immaterial mind or brain on any version of physicalism. Mind or soul. But they deny that mental states can be reduced to brain states. That's because a belief, for example, cannot be wholly described without loss of meaning in purely physical terms. Among other things, beliefs have what we call intentional content. They are about something. Take, for example, my belief that God exists. My belief is about God. But the corresponding neural event, whatever that may be, is not about anything at all. And the same is true of desires and other mental states. The mental is anomalous, truly unique and irreducible. again, according to the non-reductive physicalists. An increasing number of theistic philosophers argue that the second view, non-reductive physicalism, is compatible with Christianity. That is, they argue that one can uphold the various tenets of Christian doctrine while simultaneously believing that the human person is a physical thing and not an immaterial soul. However, this claim is a bit puzzling. After all, if we grant that Christian physicalism is tenable, and it will not be my aim here to argue that it is, a natural question to ask is how it can be that I might survive my death if what I am is a physical thing. After all, upon death, a person's body decays. Sometimes it is cremated, or cannibalized, or mutilated, or obliterated in some dramatic fashion. If the physical thing which undergoes such a fate is me, then how can I possibly be said to survive? Is there a coherent story to tell about how a physical entity, like me, ex hypothesi, can survive bodily death? A handful of Christian philosophers have offered such stories. Let me warn you that, as you might already be suspecting, the proposals can be rather bizarre. Of course, that a theory is bizarre does not by itself imply that the theory is impossible or even that it is false. But we are about to engage in a bit of abstract metaphysics. It's the sort of thing that could make your head hurt, so consider yourself forewarned. I will now take the various proposals in turn. Historically, the most dominant account of the resurrection of the body is one that was defended by Thomas Aquinas with more than a little help from Aristotelian metaphysics. The story goes like this. Upon death, bodies deteriorate and over time are eventually, and sometimes rather quickly, reduced to a heap of suborganic matter. Resurrection, then, is the divine act whereby God reassembles the decomposed bits that once constituted, John Wesley say, let's face it, if anyone's been resurrected, so as to bring it about that Wesley exists once more. There we go, just like that. That is, the reassembled bits compose an object, and that object is supposed to be identical with Wesley's pre-mortem body. The problem, according to, my slides really, I'm missing some things, that's all right. The problem, according to Peter van Inwagen, who's a contemporary philosopher, and John Locke before him, is that this supposition is wrong. The object which results from the reassembly cannot be the very object that was Wesley's body before death, since that would imply that a single object has multiple beginnings. Suppose a library claims to have in its possession a certain manuscript, Thomas Aquinas' Summa, say, written in St. Thomas's own hand. Suppose further that the library claims that this manuscript was burned in the year 1506, but that God miraculously recreated it in 1507. According to Van Inwagen, this scenario sounds quite impossible. God, being omnipotent, could no doubt create an exact duplicate of the original manuscript, but the divinely created manuscript would not be identical to the original. After all, its earliest moment of existence would have been after Aquinas' death, and so it could not have been written by Aquinas. The two manuscripts have distinct causal histories. One, the original, was brought about by Aquinas. The other, the duplicate, was brought about by God. As such, there is not one manuscript, but two. While I'm inclined to agree with Van Inwagen on this point, I won't argue the matter further here, as the reassembly view is problematic for other reasons. Suppose you meet with the unfortunate fate of becoming a tasty entree for a cannibal. And some of the atoms that once made up your body now make up his. And suppose that the cannibal immediately dies. When God sets to the task of reassembling, how can he reassemble both you and the cannibal when the particular atoms in question have two claimants? Notice that the problem can be posed without introducing cannibalism. Maybe you wish I had done so. Upon a person's death, the atoms that composed her will immediately or eventually come to at least partly compose other items in the universe, including sometimes other people. In the event that they do come to compose another person, God cannot resurrect both the original person, call her P1, and the person with the more recent claim to those atoms, call her P2, since certain atoms will have been shared by both P1 and P2. This could happen in a more direct way if, for example, your organs are donated and transplanted into the body of another person. If resurrection requires reassembling all of one's material bits, then God will have to choose between P1 and P2. What's more, bodies are gaining and losing bits of matter all the time, so that the atoms which now compose me are altogether distinct from those that compose, say, my 10-year-old body. On this view, God could in principle resurrect both me and my 10-year-old self, and as Van Inwagen points out, he might reassemble both sets of atoms, and then once resurrected, I could turn to my 10-year-old self, and she to me, and both of us could correctly say to the other, I am you. The problem, of course, is we've got two physical objects, distinct spatial regions anyway, claiming to be one thing. That's why that sounds weird. Okay. Certain more recent attempts to defend the possibility of resurrection given physicalism flow out of a general non-dualistic view about human persons as things that bear some important non-identity relation to their bodies. For Lynn Rudder Baker, who's also a contemporary philosopher, that relation is constitution. According to Baker's constitution view, human persons are not identical to their bodies or to part of their bodies, but are instead constituted by their bodies. Baker's view is materialistic insofar as she claims that human persons are necessarily embodied, but it is not true on her view that they must have the body they in fact have. After all, a human being is a partly psychological kind. To be human, for Baker, is to be constituted by a human body. To be a person, whether human or otherwise, is to have what she calls a first-person perspective. That is, to think about oneself as oneself and to identify one's thoughts as one's own. The requirement here is not merely that persons be conscious, since a being can be conscious while lacking a first-person perspective. Such may be the case for non-human primates and other higher animals. A person, on the other hand, must be self-conscious, viewing herself as the subject of her experiences. Constitution, importantly, is not identity. Consider a statue and the particular lump of matter which constitutes it. Now, I'll call them statue and lump, respectively. So statue and lump can be said to differ in certain respects. For example, lump could exist in a world without art, whereas statue cannot. And statue could not exist without being a statue, whereas lump can. Put differently, statue has a property which lump lacks, namely the property of being a statue wherever it exists. On the other hand, statue and lump are arguably not just two independent individuals. Many of statue's aesthetic properties depend on lump's physical properties. And of course, the two are spatially coincident. They occur in exactly the same places and the same times. Take the particular statue, Michelangelo's David. I had a lovely picture, but my slides are not working properly. I think you know what it looks like. David and the piece of marble which constitutes it, call it marble, have been located at exactly the same places at the same times since roughly 1504. And there are other similarities. David and marble have precisely the same size, weight, color, smell, and so on. And these similarities are no accident, for David does not exist separately from marble. There are a number of things that make the Constitution view puzzling, and these have been well rehearsed in the literature. Let me mention two. First, Baker claims that Constitution is pervasive. She says, quote, pieces of paper constitute dollar bills, strands of DNA constitute genes, pieces of cloth constitute flags, bits of bronze constitute statues. So this is a relation that we just see all over the place. End quote. One way in which Baker shores up her non-identity claim is to posit that the piece of paper and the dollar bill have distinct causal powers. They can bring about different things or cause different kinds of effects. For example, when a large stone is placed in certain circumstances, it acquires new properties, and a new thing, say a monument to soldiers who have died in battle, comes into being. The constituted thing, the monument, has effects in virtue of having the properties that the constituting thing, the stone, would not have had if it had not constituted a monument. The monument attracts speakers and crowds on patriotic holidays. It brings tears to people's eyes. It sparks protests. Had it not constituted a monument, the stone would not have had any of these effects. However, if this is right, it would seem that there will be widespread overdetermination of effects, since, as Timothy O'Connor and Jonathan Jacobs put it, quote, every socially based kind, such as currency or works of art, results in a co-located object with brand new causal powers. The piece of paper and the dollar bill, the lump of clay and the statue, etc., end quote. Second, there is a question about just what the constitution relation is and whether it is coherent. According to it, we can have in a single spatio-temporal location, so one place, two body-shaped objects that wholly overlap, so that when they get on the scale together and it registers 150 pounds, that is the weight of each of them individually and also the weight of them collectively. That's baffling. And it's hard to know what would shore up that kind of fact if it were a fact. Even if these problems are surmountable, our interest is with Baker's claim that the Constitution view offers an account of the resurrection which, in her words, quote, fares better than its competitors, end quote. Remember that for Baker, John Wesley is constituted by his body, but is not identical to it. So while it is true that Wesley must be embodied at any time that he exists, here or in the hereafter, his post-mortem self needn't have his pre-mortem body. Presumably, the post-mortem body could be wholly distinct and discontinuous with the pre-mortem body. What must be the case, however, is that Wesley's first-person perspective comes to be realized in a glorified body. How does this come about? Baker says, quote, all that is needed is God's free decree that brings about one contingent state of affairs rather than another. If God decrees that the person with body one have Wesley's first-person perspective, then Wesley is the person with body one, end quote. From a purely Christian perspective, this move may not appear problematic, but from a materialistic perspective, it's rather unsatisfying. Baker denies substance dualism, recall. She's trying to carve out a materialist or physicalist view. So the picture she presents is not one in which God simply decides which body to attach a certain soul to. He's not just like got a soul and he's looking for some body to connect it up with. Rather, her picture is one according to which God simply decides which material thing manifests my psychology. That might be at one moment a middle-aged female body, at the next moment a 3-year-old child's body, and at the very next moment an 85-year-old male body. Now, Baker doesn't imagine things going this way, of course. Perhaps out of altruism, God would never bring about such wild results. Thank goodness. Can you imagine? You look in the mirror and you don't know what you're going to see. But her view doesn't preclude such results either. And for that reason, I think we should look for something better. The physicalist I've suggested is motivated by a scientific picture of the human person. In particular, she believes that one's mental life depends in a rather strong way on one's physiology. This will naturally lead, I think, to a view of the human person as dependent upon, for existence as well as continued persistence, on the existence of a single and particular continuous physical item, namely this one, right? Her body. On physicalism, one's body is not accidental to one. Baker's materialism imposes the very weak requirement that I need merely be embodied. So while my mental life is in fact connected to the body that now constitutes me, it could just as well be connected to some other, altogether different body. The persistence of my body plays no role, indeed is not a relevant consideration in whether or not I persist. This is at best materialism light, and at worst, materialism in name only. Material continuity, that is, sameness of material stuff from one moment to the next, must, it seems to me, be a requirement for the persistence of any object that is even partly a material object. There's more to say. Once divine fiat is brought to bear, we see that the various examples of constitution we were given to motivate and articulate the theory, statues and lumps, for example, are importantly disanalogous from the person's case. Imagine that one evening a group of deviant but talented art students break into Florence's Galleria dell'Accademia and they remove David, the statue. In its place, they leave a fake. Remember, I mentioned they're talented, so this fake is in every way indistinguishable from the original. Indeed, let's suppose it is even crafted out of the same kind of Carrara marble of which the original is fashioned. Come the next day when the crowds gather once again, this time around the new statue, whatever emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are sparked in these onlookers by the new statue are precisely, I think we can suppose, of the sort that would have been sparked by David. And yet the new statue clearly is not David. I'm sure the museum would be quite upset. Right? That's not David. There. It is a fake, a mere duplicate. Are we to suppose that divine fiat can change matters in this case? That by virtue of simply willing or intending that the new marble realize the various statue properties of the original David, God can make it the case that the crowds now gathered are peering at David. Not a duplicate, but David, the original. I think the answer is no, but notice, were the answer yes, it would seem to be in virtue of God's doing something else. That is, by doing something which brings it about that the old material comes to be present in the museum once again. And so it will not merely be a matter of divine fiat. Here's an analogy. Imagine that a beaker contains a clear liquid, in this case, H2SO4. Can an omnipotent being make it the case that the beaker instead contains water? Of course, right? By making it the case that the H2SO4 is replaced with H2O. But if we are to have a case analogous to Baker's resurrection story, then the question we need to be asking is this: can an omnipotent being make it the case, merely by intending that it be so, that the H2SO4 in the beaker is water? Okay? It retains its current composition, but now it's water. By the way, it's one thing to just call it water, but that's not quite what we're after, right? You can call H2SO4 whatever you like, but that won't make it water, since water is H2O. So this seems impossible. Anything that is not H2O is not water. The upshot is that Baker's account allows for certain physical items, that is, persons, remember they're supposed to be physical items on this view, to be exempt from the sorts of constraints imposed by their own nature as physical items, since that which materially constitutes them is merely accidental to their being the things that they are. Perhaps you're thinking that things can't get any stranger. I assure you they can. The following is a view cooked up by Dean Zimmerman. Immediately prior to death and with God's help, Wesley's body undergoes an exhaustive replication. More accurately, every particle in his body replicates, right? One by one, so that then you get an exhaustive replication. Now, what happens is each particle replicates, so it produces two. Okay? So what you end up with is, well, two Wesleys instead of one, so to speak, at least two bodies. One of these bodies remains as his corpse. The other jumps through space and time to the afterlife. Imagine here a scenario akin to what you might see in a cartoon where a person survives a precipitous drop of an elevator toward the basement floor by jumping out at the last minute. The body which escapes with an impressive spatio-temporal leap is Wesley, because seeing as it is a mere corpse, the body left behind is not a candidate for being Wesley. It can't be Wesley, it's just a corpse. Okay, so here's our Wesley. Never mind that he's on Bob's body. We don't have to worry about that. All right, he pushes the button despite our urging him not to, right? And here he goes. Right? That's what happens. He's still going. Jump. Okay. And really a little late, but there we go. Okay. There are a handful of objections to Zimmerman's model, as you could probably imagine. The objection that I want to press is related to an objection we raised for the Constitution view. Notice that what Zimmerman calls the budding off, this is the replication process, results in a resurrected body that is composed entirely of new material bits. That is, the resurrected body shares no atoms with the original pre-mortem body. The view allows, indeed posits, that conjoining states, as we put it, neighboring states of Wesley, are in every way materially dissimilar. That is, they share no material parts. From one stage to the next, as he crosses over, Wesley undergoes an exhaustive replacement of constitutive material bits. On an ontology that includes persisting objects, objects like organisms can lose their parts. All right. When I take my car to the mechanic to have the tires changed, the car loses some of its parts, right? Its tires. And it gains new parts, new tires. But objects cannot undergo an immediate, exhaustive replacement of parts. Human bodies undergo material replacement as part of the routine and natural course of things. A body might change drastically. That is, for example, it might double in size or disfigure to the point of being unrecognizable. But so long as the replacement takes place gradually, the body survives the changes. The idea is perhaps best understood in terms of assimilation, where a body surviving the gaining, say, of new atoms is due to its ability to assimilate those atoms into its organizational structure. A complete replacement of atoms means that assimilation cannot occur. It's not difficult to identify clear cases in which assimilation fails to occur. For example, when an organism undergoes a complete or even a large-scale replacement of material parts. And there are clear cases in which assimilation succeeds, when an organism produces new skin cells to replace ones that have died. In my view, the persistence of material objects depends in part on the persistence of at least some of their constituent parts. On the falling elevator model, each of Wesley's atoms buds a new atom, which then leaps across space and time to compose Wesley in the afterlife. But given that not one of these atoms in the resurrected body was ever assimilated into Wesley's pre-mortem body, they cannot compose him. Thus, the body in the afterlife is not Wesley, but a duplicate. That's a result I trust none of us wants. Right? You don't want to find out that it's somebody else who gets to enjoy the beatific vision. You're hoping it's you. Views like Baker's and Zimmerman's materialized, forgive the pun, following a provocative paper published by Peter van Inwagen over 30 years ago. In that paper, van Inwagen offers the following possible account of resurrection. At a moment just prior to death, God whisks away a person's body, or more likely some part of a person's body, to the afterlife. At the same moment, he replaces the original body with a perfect simulacrum. The result, of course, is that any post-mortem bodies that we encounter are, or in any case contain, a simulacrum. The entire process is perfectly undetectable by humans, and so is consistent with everything we apprehend in our experience of corpses. including when we perform autopsies or otherwise give them an especially careful look over. It's a rather wild story, no doubt, but a nevertheless coherent one. A central objection to it has been that it has God engaging in widespread deception. And so it violates Descartes' no deceiver axiom. According to Descartes, God is not a deceiver. In fact, that's exactly why, on Descartes' view, we can trust our senses, that which we get through our senses, right? Because if it were otherwise, then God would be routinely allowing us to have seemings, right? Seems to me there's a podium here, when in fact there may not be, right? And this would be a kind of deception that Descartes found unacceptable. On this basis, that it seems to violate Descartes' no deceiver axiom, Zimmerman suggests that, quote, the Christian materialist would surely do well to look for a better story than this, end quote. And that's where you get the falling elevator. So much better. But this strikes me as a bit too quick. After all, Van Inwagen has offered a story according to which the very physical part of me that is essential to my being me is preserved and a new glorified body is created around it. This is incredible, no doubt. And it is duly noted that the view implies that God is a body snatcher who engages in rather widespread deception, since every corpse is, or in any case contains, a simulacrum. Perhaps this should trouble one a great deal. I'm not sure. Deception isn't always morally problematic. If a Nazi soldier appears at your door and asks if you are harboring Jews in your home, I think many of us will agree that one is morally permitted, perhaps morally required, to refrain from telling the truth, or even to tell a lie. Deception is thought by nearly everyone but Immanuel Kant to be permissible in circumstances in which other moral considerations outweigh one's prima facie duty to tell the truth. Consider the tactics that parents of young children sometimes employ in an attempt to maintain the child's safety, in spite of her limited understanding of the world and its potential perils. Some friends of mine have a young son who does not yet have a general concept of danger. He has, however, had some experience with heat. Enough, anyway, to know that very hot items are worth avoiding. So in order to protect their son, when the little boy ventures uncomfortably near the street, his parents point to the street and say, hot. And when he makes a beeline for the swimming pool, they say the same thing. Now, neither the street nor the pool is in fact hot. So what they're telling their son is not true. And by the way, my friends are here tonight, so if you feel they need a scolding, I can point them out to you. But I hardly think any of us would view them as morally deficient parents. Quite the contrary. They are clearly looking out for their son's best interest, which is precisely the sort of thing good parents do. It's not terribly difficult to imagine some potentially justifying reason for God to keep us in the dark, should it be the case that bits of us go missing upon death. Indeed, we might here employ a familiar theistic strategy. As we are all aware, when it comes to divine activity, the mysteries abound. You and I may be unaware of what reasons justify God in allowing, for example, the suffering that exists in the world, or what explains the fact that God chooses to keep God's self hidden as opposed to fully revealed, when that would certainly go a good distance toward helping folks enter into communion, a relationship with him, if they could just have, right, cold hard evidence that God is. But God doesn't do that. Presumably, the fact that we don't know, that we lack knowledge of the reason why God doesn't do that doesn't imply that there isn't a reason. There are a lot of negatives in there, sorry. But our failure to know doesn't imply there isn't a reason. What's more, it may be unreasonable to expect that if there were such reasons, human beings would be privy to them. Much like my friend's son is unaware of their reasons for, frankly, lying to him about the temperature of the street. If these replies are satisfactory in other contexts, then I see no reason why they couldn't be employed to deflect the charge that such trickery as is involved in concealing from us the fact that bits of us routinely go missing upon death threatens God's moral perfection. So where do we go from here? I think the options are as follows. First, one can abandon the project of formulating a physicalist conception of resurrection and adopt dualism. Of course, to do so would be to deny that the considerations which motivate physicalism have the motivational force we might initially have been inclined to grant them, or that the challenges for dualism are as strong as we may at first have taken them to be. And I'd like to issue a warning here. On one familiar dualistic conception of the afterlife, the soul, in virtue of being by its very nature immortal, persists beyond the destruction of the body. As Plato himself recognized, no doubt, the view has the attractive feature that it successfully accounts for post-mortem survival. Now, he didn't have especially theological considerations in mind, but he certainly was pretty excited to get to the world of the forms, which was going to occur post-physical death. But I think a Christian theist is wise to proceed cautiously here. If it is a feature of souls that they persist, it's a feature of them, that is, they're immortal, then there is no need for God to resurrect one. That is, there's no special miraculous divine act needed to make it the case that one survives death. But resurrection is surely a miraculous event, if ever there were one. And lest one be content in one's affirmation of dualism, that she needn't worry about how a material thing might come to live again post-death, let me urge such an individual to consider, as we all must do, the possibility that her view is false. We've all been in the position of taking something to be true, only later to discover otherwise. If one considers it even a possibility that physicalism is true, then we should not abandon the project of searching for an adequate account of post-mortem bodily survival. Second, one can persist in the attempt to understand how resurrection might be possible given physicalism. Indeed, the views we've looked at give us reason at least to be optimistic that it is possible, even if we haven't arrived at a wholly satisfying account. I suggest that of the views we've considered, Van Inwagen's is the most promising. Yeah, that's the body snatcher view, I know. For on his view, the very physical part of me that is essential to my being me is preserved, so that my resurrected body is the same body that composed me prior to death. The story is incredible, no doubt, but there are no glaring inconsistencies. That is no reason to think it impossible. It is duly noted that the view implies that God is a body snatcher who engages in rather widespread deception, since every corpse, again, is, or in any case contains, a simulacrum, a fake. If this is the gravest objection the view faces, and one is serious in her commitment to physicalism, perhaps in light of what she takes to be good evidence for the view, then I have offered considerations which may temper the force of the objection. The physicalist I've suggested is motivated by a general scientific picture of the human person. If such a person is also a Christian theist, she wants to know if persons of the sort she thinks there are can survive death. Assuming there is a viable affirmative answer, she may be willing to put up with a little deception, assuming, of course, that such deception is justified. Thank you.
Well, nicely done and perfect timing. We have several minutes for questions, and as Professor Rice and I discussed, I add no value up here. She can point to people as well as I can, so I'm going to just be the timer and go ahead. We have a microphone in the back. This is being videotaped, so if you could raise your hand, and Rebekah, make your choices, and you're on.
The first hand I saw go up, that's right.
Yeah, especially.
Oh, sorry, we need the mic.
I guess especially in response to in wagons with the simulacrum idea, and also I think in most of these models, none of them seem to look to Jesus' resurrection as a model for resurrection, which as a Christian would be the model. I mean, the thing that we're hoping to reenact, or to have God reenact in our own bodies. And especially seeing as Jesus' entire body was reassumed, or at least all the disciples believed it was reassumed, it disappeared. How do they account for that?
So yeah, what I was gonna ask you is, what is it about the model of Christ's resurrection that should be informative or instructive in these? Because after all, the body disappeared, right? I mean, you might expect on dualism, there's no reason for the body to go missing. Right? It could stay there, and you could still have a story about survival, right? He didn't die. I mean, he died, but he didn't cease to be, or something like that. So the body goes missing, and then there is a body post, right, after the whole event, right? Now it does some kind of remarkable things that our bodies can't now do. But then you said the whole body went missing. Are you thinking, so that's reason to think the whole body as opposed to the brain is needed, or?
Yes, most of the early Christians believed that Jesus' body was reassumed. The reason why it was no longer in the tomb was because it was reassumed in resurrection. And seeing that is, I mean, distinctly, a Christian idea of resurrection is distinct from just survival, and that it involves the body.
Yeah, though, I mean, this idea of it being assumed clearly just isn't a model for us, right? Because bodies aren't routinely going missing around here, right? I mean, if they were, probably a lot more folks would believe. Right? I don't know where it went, but they went somewhere else. It would be, I think, what we would say. So I don't know what to say about what that
I'll
should
pass
tell
it
us,
on,
but
I
I
don't
would
use up all the
say
time.
that there might be some very particular reasons why Christ's body went missing, to call attention to some unusual event that it was worth calling attention to. Yeah.
Thanks.
Stamatis.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture. My question has to do about a specific insistence in the argument that the body had to be the same body.
Yeah.
So if I think about it from a physics perspective, all electrons are, I mean, you cannot tell one electron from another electron. There is this indistinguishability of fundamental particles. And so if it were possible to take you from there to the foyer, for instance, without you going through the intervening space, through teleportation or something like that, then and maybe we could borrow, atoms from your foot to reconstruct your elbow, etc., etc., etc. It seems to me, as long as we had a one-to-one mapping of the underlying stuff to the original stuff, then a physicalist, a non-reductive physicalist, would say that you would be you there. Isn't that correct?
Wait, okay, so are you imagining that? So you're imagining it's just the organization of the stuff, not the stuff itself. That's essential. I mean, this is the assumption, by the way, that is involved in the. Is it a teleporter on Star Trek?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the beaming. When Scotty gets beamed, what happens? Well, I must just not be a very good Trekkie, but I didn't know for a long time that the scenario was supposed to be one where Scotty is disassembled and then reassembled using material from the new planet or whatever. So it's not. I thought his parts travel. They don't travel in that view. So given the things that I've said, I have to say the teleporter is impossible. You can't teleport. Bummer. But I am committed to that. Now your claim that here's where I want to ask a whole lot of questions. But when you say we can't tell one electron from another, I want to know what the implication of that is. If it's just the case that it's kind of an epistemic, but we can't tell. Like there's nothing, we don't look at one electron and go, oh, that has that, electron A quality, versus an electron B quality. I get that. But if it's that real, I would say one thing that distinguishes any kind of physical item is that it has a certain spatial location that's occupied by that and only that item. So it is distinguishable, though we may not have many other features that distinguish it.
Hi. I was wondering if physicalism has any conversation with what it would define as ontologically real, or if it doesn't even consider that question.
Don't give up the mic yet. Say that again. Does it have anything to say?
Does it have any philosophical conversation with sort of like how we define real?
Oh. Let's see. Let me sum up my metaphysics course. I would say, I'm working with this kind of idea, and the views I've represented, as I've represented them, would work with this idea that what is real is, well, however the world is. And by world, I mean all of reality. That's a really circular definition right there. But physicalism, as I've been talking about, is a view just about the nature of persons. Now, there is a broader view, an ontological view, that has the same name, physicalism. There's also ontological dualism. Now, every Christian is an ontological dualist because they think there's at least one non-physical item, at least one, right? Namely God. Maybe there are more, but there's at least one. That's enough to make one a dualist, an ontological dualist about just what there is. I guess what the folks who are defending the views that we've talked about tonight are insisting is that one can be an ontological dualist without being a mind-body dualist. So indeed, there's an immaterial substance, at least one, an immaterial thing, but you and I may not be ourselves immaterial things. Now, physicalists in the ontological sense, of course, say something about the nature of reality. They say the nature of reality is such that the only things there are physical things. Ontological physicalism rules out Christianity. I just don't see any way around that. So these views are all about mind-body physicalism, not about ontological physicalism. Does that help? Yeah.
So in this, if we presuppose physicalism, maybe your preferred version of Christian physicalism, the last one the body snatching.
Of resurrection.
Yeah. I mean, in this kind of Christian physicalist scenario, does the incarnation, is Christ purely physical on the earth?
I'm not.
That's fine.
And nothing I've said here implies one view or other, as far as I can tell. But unless you start connecting up, like if this is the right view about us, then it has to be the right story about Christ. I don't know that I'm prepared to say all that. Christ had a distinctive feature that the rest of us lack. That's that he wasn't just fully human, it's also fully God. So I'm going to allow that there's something of an exception in this case.
The one
Concerning
dual object, kind of the one dual person,
perhaps,
whoever
that
exists.
Could be.
Maybe.
That could be. At least I don't see why a physicalist couldn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
After all, the physicalist as I've described her here, unless one is just so convinced by the mind-body problem that they think dualism is incoherent. Like, it just has some kind of internal inconsistency. The physicalist I'm imagining allows that dualism is possible. It could have been that you and I could be dual entities. It just might be a matter of fact that we're not. I don't know. God decided not to do it that way. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be, one case.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'm curious what in Genesis 1 it talks about like the likeness of God. If it's not something non-physical, what is it?
You all take
Like
me.
it could be. I know. It could be like. I guess it could be like something mental or
Do you mean without a soul?
psychological.
If it's not our soul that makes us imago Dei.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
You all take me to have defended physicalism. I said explicitly I hadn't. I wasn't physicalism. But fair enough. Okay, so if one does say this, right, then you're right. It wouldn't be in virtue of having a soul that we are made in the image of God. We would have to tell some other story. I take this to be another question to be asked of one who is leaning in this direction, leaning toward physicalism, and trying to reconcile it with their Christian commitments. Now, I don't know, even if one is a dualist, I'm not sure that's the thing to say about, that's the story to give, according to which we are in the image of God. That's in virtue of having a soul. Maybe not, but I certainly know some dualists who don't tell that story. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
This is a technical question, but if you admit that Cartesian dualism is logically possible, then there's a possible world in which I am not my body. And if so, granting any standard system of modal logic, I am not identical with my body. And it seems that if Cartesian dualism is logically possible, it's true. How would you handle that?
So I think it's a contingent matter that I am a physical thing. That is not necessary in the sense that you're implying, right? It's not a logical necessity. But here's the thing. Sometimes facts about, actual fact fixes what is possible. So for a long time, folks would talk about the last star seen in the evening and the first star seen in the morning. They gave one the name Hesperus, the other Phosphorus. And they would say things like, it could be that, that Hesperus is destroyed, but Phosphorus continues to exist. Now you all know these descriptions really just apply to Venus, right? One and the same thing. Turns out, as a matter of fact, the last star seen in the evening and the first star seen in the morning are identical. So in any world in which you have Hesperus, you have Phosphorus. That's the kind of necessity that I'm helping myself to. If what it is to be me is to be a physical thing, then anywhere I go, a physical thing must go.